bone rex clemens, cui bona conta placem. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor.
This is a test. This is a test. This is a test of my voice. And then that was a test of the pre-recording stuff, you know. And now I'll have a test. Let's see.
Rex Christe Redemptor.
Okay, so let's see what I know.
Promsito sana Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, promsito sana Israeles tu Rex, Davidis et inclita proles, nomine qui in Domini, Rex benedicte venis, cetus in excelsis, te laudat celicus omnis, et mortalis homo, et cuncta creata simul. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, promsito sana pium, plebs hebreati via venit, cum precebito hymnis, ad sumus exetibi, itibi passuro, solvebant munia lauris, nos tibi regnanti, angimus exemelos. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, promsito sana pium, placuere tibi, Facea devotio nostra, Rex bone Rex clemens, cui bona cuncta placent. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Israel est tu Rex, Davidis et inclita proles, nomine qui in Domini, Rex benedicte venis, cetus in excelsis, te laudat celicus omnis, et mortalis homo, et cuncta creata simul. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Plebs Hebrea tibi, cum palmis obvia venit, cum precevo ymnis, ad sumus exetibi, itibi passuro, solvebant munia lauris, nos tibi regnanti, andimus exemelos. Gloria laus et honor divisit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Placuere dicit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Israel est tu Rex, Davidis et inclita proles, nomine qui in Domini, Rex benedicte venis, cetus in excelsis, te laudat celicus omnis, et mortalis homo, et cuncta creata simul. Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui puerile decus, prompsitus sana pium. Plebs Hebrea tibi, cum palmis obvia venit, cum precevoto omnis, ad sumus exetibi, itibi pasuro, solvebant munia lauris, nos tibi regnanti, andimus exemelos. Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We'll get you on air in a bit.
Sounds good.
Prompsitus sana pium.
I am the Lord. listening to Radio Maria, streaming live from our website at radiomaria.us through your smartphone on the Radio Maria Play app on 580 AM KJMJ Alexandria, 1360 AM KNIR New Iberia, 89.7 FM KBIO Natchitoches, and 91.1 FM KOJO Lake Charles. In Texas on 1250 AM KDEI Port Arthur. In Ohio on 88.7 FM WHJM in Anna, 1600 AM WULM Springfield, with translator W277AO, 103.3 FM Enid. In Pennsylvania on 88.1 FM WHHN in Hollidaysburg, Altoona. In Mississippi also on 88.1 FM WOLM D'Iberville, Biloxi. In Wisconsin on 91.3 FM WRMW Peshtigo, in Florida on 91.9 FM WMKL Hammocks, Miami, and in Tennessee on 1280 AM WMCP Columbia, with translator W277DK, 98.9 FM also in Columbia.
You are listening to Radio Maria, a Christian voice in your home. We now present our program, Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, with your host, Roy Showman.
Hi, this is Roy Showman, and welcome once again to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism, the show on Radio Maria that celebrates the Jewish roots of the Catholic Church, or seen the other way, that's around, celebrates the fulfillment, the full realization of all of the promise of Judaism in the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Well, before I get launched into today's program, let me all wish you a very happy first Saturday, which is traditionally dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And if you don't know about them, check out the First Saturday Promises, First Saturday devotions, and the promises associated with them. It's a great gift that we have in the Catholic Church, is these specific devotions associated with promises. We just had Divine Mercy Sunday, which of course was a huge one. And every month we have the first Friday and the first Saturday devotions. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What am I here to talk about? Well, again, it's in the aftermath of Easter, which means in the aftermath of Holy Week. I wanted to talk about the mystery associated with the Jews' failure to recognize Christ when he came, and the mystery of the continuing meaningfulness or meaninglessness of Judaism, of the Jewish people, of the Jewish religion in this period in between the first and second comings of Christ. Now, I will confess something before I start, which is that this is an area that is very frequently subject to misunderstanding, and some of those forms of misunderstanding perhaps inadvertently result in quite hostile views of Jews and Judaism, and some unfairly negative views of Jews and Judaism. And most of those shibboleths, most of those calumnies disappear rather quickly under sunlight, the sunlight of the truth. And so I want to just present the very straightforward resolution of some of those confusions today. And my source is going to be Romans 11, St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 11, which is the mother lode of Catholic theology, actually, about the meaningfulness of Judaism in between the first and second comings of Christ. So that's the plan for today. Now, before I start with Romans 11, I want to give a little bit of a foundation, which is to talk about supersessionism. It's a big word. It's got other words that mean the same thing, more or less. Replacement theology or supersessionism are essentially the same thing. And the underlying issue is, in what way has the Catholic Church replaced Israel in the Old Testament sense of Israel, the promised people, the chosen people? In what ways have the Catholic Church replaced the Jewish people and, quote, Israel, close quote? And in what ways has the Catholic Church not replaced Israel or the chosen people? Now, the only way to see into that clearly, and before I launch in, let me say, this is a live call-in program. The number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And I will interrupt myself at any point in this program to make clarifications or answer questions which are basically clarifications of the discussion that I'm having. So in other words, if I puzzle you, or if you disagree with something, or if you don't understand anything, then if you call, I will try to be aware of the call, which I may or may not succeed in doing. I hope that the station lets me know if in fact a call comes in, and I will answer your question or defend my position or whatever. But anyway, okay. So in order to make sense out of this, one has to distinguish between two things. One is the so-called election of the Jews, whatever that means, the chosenness of the Jews. The word that St. Paul uses is election. So one has to distinguish between the election of the Jews and the sacramental system for salvation that God gave the Jews in the Old Testament. That involved the temple in Jerusalem, and animal sacrifice. So the very first thing one has to do is keep those two dimensions separate in one's mind. Election, that is chosenness of the Jews, whatever that means, versus sacramental, salvific system of Judaism. And to cut to the chase, the answer is very simple, which is that the sacramental, salvific system that God gave the Jews in the Old Testament has been completely abrogated, ended, replaced by the Catholic Church and her sacraments. Even if there were a temple in Jerusalem, and even if the Jewish priests performed all of the ritual sacrifices of animals that they were supposed to perform in the temple, it would not have the ability to remit sins. It would not have purifying value, so to speak. That sacramental system has ended. That's very clear from the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament. It's very clear. It's clear everywhere you look. It's actually clear in the Easter liturgy. So the salvation through the Jewish sacraments, so to speak, has been abrogated, has been replaced, has ended. There's no room to actually think that that sacramental system still would have an effect if it were followed. However, the question is moot because it hasn't been followed in 2,000 years. The entire sacramental salvific system that God gave the Jews in the Old Testament required animal sacrifice. The only place animal sacrifice could be performed was in the temple in Jerusalem, and the temple in Jerusalem hasn't existed since 70 AD. So one could perhaps have a theological argument about whether between 33 AD, when Jesus was crucified, and 70 AD, there was any value to the Jewish sacraments. But it becomes completely moot after 70 AD, because the Jews were unable to perform any of the sacraments given to them in the Old Testament. Because of this, occasionally, theologians, including Catholic theologians, make the error of thinking that means that the election of the Jews has completely ended, that there's no meaningfulness to, quote, Israel, close quote, as it's expressed in the Old Testament, or rather, more precisely, the Israel in the Old Testament has been replaced by the Catholic Church. So second part, this last part of how and to what extent has Israel in the Old Testament and the promises made to the descendants of Abraham in the Old Testament gone away in favor of those promises and those gifts having been reassigned to the members of the Catholic Church. And that's what basically most of what I talk about today is going to be about. So that's one half of what I'm going to talk about today. If I have time, I hope I have time. The other half is basically why didn't the Jews accept Jesus when he came, And I'm not going to look at that from a kind of socio-political viewpoint, what the Jews were expecting in the Messiah and whether they were expecting a military victory and so forth. But rather, I'm going to look at it from a theological perspective. That is, why in divine providence was it arranged that the Jews should not recognize Jesus when he came? And the fact that it was arranged by divine providence and that it was the intention of God that most of the Jews not accept Jesus when he came is made evident, is actually explicitly stated in St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 11. So with that rather long-winded introduction, let me begin reading from chapter 11 of Romans. This is St. Paul speaking. I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means. I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Okay? Very beginning of the chapter. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means. I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Now, if anyone thinks that St. Paul is saying that God didn't reject St. Paul because St. Paul is now a Catholic, St. Paul makes that quite clear. That's not what he means, because he says, look, he hasn't rejected me. I am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. So he's even announcing his line of descent from Abraham and saying, look, because of that, I am not rejected. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. And also that sentence, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. God did not foreknow the Catholic Church, so to speak. In other words, if you're at the point of time of St. Paul, the Catholic Church is, you could say, in the present and in the future, but it certainly wasn't in the past. And yet St. Paul is saying God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew, whom he knew before, whom he knew in the past. There was no Catholic Church in the past. There were no Christians in the past. There were no Catholics in the past. Clearly, St. Paul is saying God has not rejected the Jewish people. Israel, in the sense of the Jewish people. It's always confusing in the year 2025 or 2023 to use the word Israel to refer to the Jewish people, because it's also, of course, the name of the nation state of Israel. In today's discussion, when I say Israel, I'm going to refer to the corporate body of the Jewish people, the descendants by blood, so to speak, from Abraham through Isaac. I'm not referring to the contemporary nation state of Israel, which is a topic for another day. Okay, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. God has not rejected Israel. God has not rejected the Jewish people. The Jewish people have not been put aside in favor of members of the Catholic Church. Now, perhaps members of the Catholic Church have been brought into the promises that God gave to Jewish people. I'm not saying that's not the case. I'm just saying that the Jewish people have not been erased from those promises. Now I'm going to go on. That was just verses 1 through 3. Now, verse 7. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it sought. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened, as it is written. God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see, and ears that should not hear, down to this very day. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see. Again, it's pretty clear in black and white, right? I'll repeat it. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it sought. The Jewish people failed to recognize the Messiah. The Jewish people failed to obtain the gift of the Messiah, which is what they were all about, what they were seeking. The elect obtained it. In other words, the Jews who became followers of Jesus, the Jews who became the early Christians, obtained it. Obviously, they became followers of Jesus. But the rest were hardened. The rest were hardened. Boy, if they were hardened, there's an agent who's hardened them, right? I mean, they were hardened. That's passive tense. They were hardened, not they were just hard-hearted. They were hardened, as it is written. Who is his agent who made them hardened? As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see, and ears that should not hear, down to this very day. Let their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see. So already we have, in black and white, that the Jews' failure to recognize Jesus, by and large, was an act of God. Or you can interpret this any way you want. I'm just reading the text. If you can think of another way to interpret it, be my guest. I can't. What then? Israel failed to obtain what it sought. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened. As it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, down to this very day. Let their eyes be darkened so they cannot see. If you just take the words at face value, they say what they mean, which is that God gave them a spirit of stupor so that they would not be able to recognize Christ. Now, I know that I'm talking a little bit rapidly. I know this stuff is heavy. It's fairly dense, and it's mysterious to many of you. So I'm very happy for this to be an interactive learning experience. The number here is 866-333-6279 or 866-333-MARY, M-A-R-Y. And if you wish to call in to express your confusion or disagreement or agreement or anything else, that is the number, 866-333-6279. And I have my eye on the incoming call board, at least at the moment. So if a call comes in, I will stop myself and take the call. So anyway, okay, until that happens, I will keep rolling along. We're now at verse 11 of chapter 11 of St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Fortunately, St. Paul, immediately after saying that God gave them a spirit of stupor and eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, etc., St. Paul explains why he had to do this and why he did this as a gift to the non-Jewish world. Why he did this essentially to enable the church to spread throughout the entire world, 99.9% of the world not being Jewish, 99.98% of the world not being Jewish. However, I see we have a call that's come in. So if the caller could give your name and where you're calling from and what your question or comment is, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Showman. It's Elizabeth from Vermont. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Hi. So I have a comment, but I would love for you to expound on it. And maybe, you're kind of talking about it already. As you know, I'm a fairly recent convert in the last 2 years, and I go to a TLM, as you know. This last Thursday, so Thursday of Tenebrae, it really hit me. I mean, I was weeping. I'm so glad it was dark in that church. I was just weeping, listening and reading along, and how the Jewish people for centuries, millennium, were just hammered by people, right? Persecuted and enslaved and kicked out of their home. And through that whole time, they never wavered in their faith and devotion to God. And then God comes and they ignore him and send him to his death. I mean, it was so profound. I intellectually I knew it, but it hit me at this different level that it seemed like there could only be a supernatural reason for that. And I just wanted to just make that comment, like how it really hit me. But I just wanted to just hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a beautiful observation, and it's definitely true. There can only be a supernatural explanation. First of all, I had a mental image very early in my conversion. As a matter of fact, I had it in my first theophany when Christ revealed himself to me. And here was the mental vision. It was a picture of the situation of the Jews. Imagine, a 6-year-old boy with a little puppy, a new little puppy. And the puppy is the light of his life, and they're best friends. And the little boy, is miserable at school every day when he can't be with his little puppy. And then he's home, and all he wants to do is, do everything with his dog and play with his dog and talk to his dog, and they're just best friends, and he's the light of his life. And then the little boy grows up a little bit, and let's say he's 12 and he goes off to school and then goes off to college, and he comes back when he's, say, 20 years old, and the little dog, who absolutely adored the boy and lived for the boy, and just sat there disconsolate whenever the boy wasn't at home, and jumped up wagging his tail when the boy came home. So the young man comes home, and he opens the front door, happy to see this dog that was the light of his life for all those years, and the dog growls and bares his teeth and won't let him in the house because he doesn't recognize him, because he went away as a 12-year-old and he's come back as a 20-year-old, and he thinks, who's this invader who has taken the place of my master and has done away with the one I loved. You're not on the line anymore, but are you? No,
I am. That's actually a really great explanation.
So that was my picture. That's what the problem, one angle of the problem of the Jews was they were so loyal to God and so devoted to God that when they didn't recognize him immediately, he became enemy number one.
That is a great image. I really appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me tell a story that's a true story that I only read about 2 days ago, but it's from Josephus. It's genuine history from when Pilate was governor of Judea. The days of this is true. This is what happened in the days of the New Testament. It was before the crucifixion. It was early in Pilate's governorship of Judea. True story. Okay. May have been after the crucifixion, actually. It may have been about 20 years later. I don't remember the date. But in any case, Pilate was the governor of Judea and, of course, the Roman ruler of Jerusalem. True story. The Romans came in one night with their banners with Caesar on it. Of Caesar. And they put up their banners in the city of Jerusalem that night. That's something they did. I don't know what the occasion was or what the celebration was or why they were putting up those banners, but they put up these banners of Caesar. And the next morning, when the Jews woke up and saw these banners of Caesar in the city, they absolutely insisted that Pilate get rid of them because it was against Jewish law for there to be any image of a person in the city. As part of the prohibition against images that's in the Old Testament. And they staged a sit-in front of Pilate's palace. And they lay down on the pavement for 5 days, refusing to move unless Pilate had the banners removed. This is a true story. So Pilate decides, he surrounds them with his soldiers, with their swords, and he tells the Jews in their sit-in, lying on the pavement in front of his palace, that unless they leave, the soldiers will cut off their heads. To which the entire Jewish crowd, kneels and bends over their necks and says, "Here's our neck. Here are our necks. Cut off our heads. We prefer that to violating Jewish law." Pilate was so appalled and astonished and didn't know what to do with this fidelity of the Jewish people to their law that he gave up and he took away the banners. True story. Okay. Yes, they were definitely fanatic, but they were fanatic for God, and it was very misplaced because, of course, Jesus was God, was their Messiah. Okay. Back to Romans 11. So here's St. Paul explaining the mystery of why God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, and let their eyes be darkened so they cannot see. Continuing with the next verse. So I ask, have they stumbled so as to fall? By no means, but through their trespass salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? Now, I'd better define Gentile. Gentile is just a fancy word for anyone who isn't Jewish. It doesn't mean anything more or less than that. It's just a term for non-Jew. I'll read those verses actually replacing non-Jew for Gentile. So I ask, have they stumbled so as to fall? By no means, but through their trespass, salvation has come to the non-Jews, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for everyone who isn't Jewish, how much more will their full inclusion mean? For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? So 4 times here, St. Paul is saying the same thing over and over again, which is that it was precisely the failure of the Jews to recognize Jesus which enabled salvation to go throughout the non-Jewish world, the Gentile world. Through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Their failure means riches for the Gentiles. Their trespass means riches for the world. Their rejection means the reconciliation of the world. The church, Christianity, would not have spread properly throughout the non-Jewish world if all the Jews around Jerusalem at the time of Jesus had flooded into the church. Now, why is this the case? We see one aspect of why this is the case from the book of Acts. I believe it's Acts 15. The very first crisis, theological crisis in the church, which required the first church council, the Council of Jerusalem, around 51 AD. What was that crisis? That crisis was, oh, wait a minute, are we allowed to let non-Jews into the church? Or is the church only for Jews? If this non-Jew wants to become a Christian, can we allow him to? Or does he first have to become a Jew in order to qualify for entry into the church? Now, this sounds very counterintuitive to us because there are people around now who claim that, well, the church is for everyone but the Jews. But in the early days, the question was, is the church for anyone but the Jews, except the Jews? And you see this, the way that this manifests itself in both the letters of Paul and in the book of Acts, is that many of the apostles, including St. Peter, thought that if a non-Jew wanted to enter the church, if he was male, he had to be ritually circumcised. He had to actually convert to Judaism before he qualified for being Christian. So if you look it up in the book of Acts, or if you look it up in the church history, you'll see the debate as being, is circumcision required for entry into the church? But that was just really the outward manifestation of the question of whether a non-Jew was allowed in the church. Anyway, St. Paul and St. Peter disagreed, and it required all the apostles to return to Jerusalem, and they held the first church council, and in it, the side won that argued that no, you do not have to ritually be a Jew before you can be allowed to be a Catholic. Thank God, right? Would have had a crippling effect on the early church. If you don't get the pun, don't ask your mother or father. But anyway, so that is, in a nutshell, certainly one of the reasons why God had to veil the eyes of the Jews. You can imagine that the estimate is that there were around 5 million Jews around Jerusalem at the time. If those 5 million had become 5 million of the 5.05 million early entrants in the church, the confusion about whether the church was really a branch of Judaism meant for Jews would have been a very serious problem to overcome. As it was, that problem was practically overcome by the fact that within 10 years, the church was visibly not Jewish. Certainly within 30 years, it was visibly more Gentile than Jewish, so no one could be confused about that. Anyway, I have been talking up a storm. I see we have another caller. I will very happily take that caller. If you could give your name and where you're calling from, please.
Oh, hi, this is Molly, and I'm calling from Virginia. And I have an obvious question. So if God veiled the eyes and the hearts of the Jewish people so that they would not understand that Jesus was the Messiah and was the Son of God, then in that, were they then not responsible and not held accountable for not accepting Jesus, and were they then allowed in heaven? And I guess that's the obvious question.
Well, it's an obvious question. It's not a very obvious answer, unfortunately. Okay, you may know who Father Mitch Pacwa is from EWTN, very famous Catholic.
Yes.
I'm stealing his line, but I think it's a good line, which is, that's a management decision. I'm in sales.
I understand.
I would not presume that is a very thorny issue, and there are legitimate Catholic positions on both sides of that issue. There's been a tremendous controversy over the centuries about the meaning of no salvation outside the church, which was dogmatically pronounced, but what it means is another question. And I don't, I can't trespass in those waters. I don't know enough, and I'm not sure that anyone actually knows. However, there is the basic principle in moral theology, which is the degree of one's guilt or culpability depends in part on whether you could have known better, should have known better, or were invincibly ignorant. And I think you could make the argument that if God veiled their eyes, that does introduce the possibility that they were invincibly ignorant. And as a matter of fact...
I understand. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent question. I am not going to race to the end now because there's more of Romans 11. Thank you for the call. I'll say goodbye and be civil, but it was a great call. And but St. Paul, near the end of the chapter, suggests that, in fact, by my reading, suggests that, no, they won't be held responsible for the divinely inspired ignorance or whatever the right way of putting that is. However, I usually take a short musical break about halfway through the show. And I'm going to do that now to rest my voice, also to let other callers call in. The number here is 866-333-6279. And for about 2 or 3 minutes, we'll have a very beautiful Gregorian chant of Salve Regina, and by a small religious community called Harpa Dei. It runs about 3 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. And if there are any calls that come in, I'll turn to the calls when at the end of the music. And if not, I'll simply continue with Romans 11. You're listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Showman, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae,
vita dulcedo, et spes nostra salve.
a te clamamus, exules, Filii Eve.
A te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale.
Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte.
et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende.
O clemens,
O pia,
o dulcis,
Virgo Maria.
Well, that was very beautiful. It gave me an opportunity to calm down a little bit, maybe even slow down a little bit my rate of talking. And it gave you, a couple of you, an opportunity to call in. So as I said, I will take the calls. Let me just give the little station announcement that this is Radio Maria you're listening to. The show is Jesus the Promised Messiah of Judaism with me, your host, Roy Schoeman, and I've been talking today about Romans 11 and the mystery of the Jews' failure to recognize Jesus when he came. And with that, if you would put on the first caller on the line, and if he or she could say their name and where they're calling from.
Hello?
Hello? Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. If you could give your name and where
Okay,
you're calling
great.
from.
My name is Patricia. I'm calling from Long Island, New York. I saw you in Huntington not too long ago.
Oh, yes.
This is not totally related to what you're talking about, but it's something I've always wanted to ask you. A while ago, I saw a really wonderful video by Bishop Jan Leeson, and I wanted to know what you thought, comment on something he said in the video. He said that when John the Baptist said, I'm not Jesus, I'm not the Messiah, and he said, I'm not even able to loosen the sandals. What Bishop Leon said is that according to Jewish tradition, that when a widow without children, that the brother of the husband who died is supposed to take off the sandal of the deceased and then put it on and then become the new husband, sort of replace that person. And he said that that's what John the Baptist was meaning when he said, I'm not worthy to loosen his sandal. And he also said that at that time, the Jews would have understood completely what he meant, meaning I can't take his place. Do you have any comment about that?
Not really. First of all, I do know that it's true by Jewish law that if if someone's brother dies, if a man's brother dies and leaves his wife a widow, then it is incumbent on the brother to marry the widow. So I do know that that's true. I never heard about it being associated with some symbolic taking off their sandal and putting it on. So I know nothing about that.
Okay.
So anyway, I mean, it's a nice idea, but whether I certainly, the marrying your brother's widow, that is something every Jew every kind of reasonably serious Jew knows about. The sandal thing, I don't think anyone today is really aware of what that tradition was or where that comes from or how well established that is. So anyway, I don't have anything to add, but it's an interesting thought.
Okay.
And thanks for your call, and thanks for coming to the
Okay,
talk in
thank you.
Huntington. That was a great evening. Anyway, I think we have another caller. If you would put him or her on, and if he or she could give his or her name.
Hello.
Hello? Yes. What's your name and where you're calling
Hello.
from, please?
My name is Terry, and I'm calling from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Okay.
And I would just like to say I've been listening to you for a long time, and I just absolutely love the way you handle both the Catholics and the Jews with great wisdom and great equanimity. But my question is this. The Jews were veiled from the Messiah for many reasons, but could it also be because they have really maintained a depth and a breadth of wisdom that we as Catholics just can't even arrive at? And I find sometimes that when I'm in a difficulty of understanding something that is Catholic, I go into the Jewish wisdom and everything just reveals itself to me. And I'm actually very thankful that the Jewish people didn't just all convert into Catholicism, because I think so much would have been lost if they did. So I don't know how that wisdom is going to be able to integrate with Catholicism, because it's mind-boggling. It's awesome, it's boundless, and it's almost incomprehensible. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. And boy, you've actually changed what I'm going to be spending the rest of the show talking about, actually, because of that comment or that question. And I can make the segue. It actually is the next section of Romans 11. By the way, this really is Romans 11, and I'm sure most of you have New Testaments at home, and you'll find out if you take down the New Testament after the show and read Romans 11 that I haven't made up a word. It's all really there. I've skipped some of it, in the interest of time and clarity, but I haven't added a word. But so anyway, the next part of Romans 11 actually addresses in a kind of indirect way what you were talking about, which is there a particular gift to the Jewish people or to Judaism, a certain anointing on it, so to speak, that God wanted to remain until the second coming by having the Jewish people or Israel or the Jewish nation or whatever you want to call it remain and to continue, basically in one way or another, continue the Jewish identity until the second coming. And St. Paul makes it pretty clear that his answer is, yeah, God did that on purpose because he wanted the I'm trying to think of the best word, the Jewish people to remain as an identifiable separate group until the second coming. And so I'll read it now. I think that probably it's time for me to say thank you and goodbye to the caller and just go on with a rather long-winded response to her excellent observation. So, remember, the last verse I read was verse 15. I think it's 15. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? And then he goes on to say, if the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump, and if the root is holy, so are the branches. So basically, what St. Paul is saying is that the holiness of the church flows out of the holiness of Judaism, or the holiness of Israel, whichever way you want to look at it. The holiness of the church flows out of the holiness of the Jewish people, or the holiness of the Jewish religion. Then he goes on, because he said, right, if the dough offered as first fruits is holy, that's of course the Jews, so is the whole lump, that is now the church. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, a wild olive shoot, were grafted in their place to share the richness of the olive tree, do not boast over the branches. If you do boast, remember, it is not you that support the root, but the root that supports you. So it's this image of the olive tree of salvation, and the root was Judaism and the Jewish people, but some of the branches of that original cultivated olive tree were broken off to make space to graft in wild olive branches. So I'll just say that verse over. But if some of the branches were broken off and you, a wild olive shoot, were grafted in their place to share the richness of the olive tree, right? That the richness of the olive tree was originally Judaism. Don't boast over the branches that were broken off to make room to graft you in. If you do boast, remember, it is not you that support the root, but the root that supports you. So the church is not the source of the holiness shared with Judaism, so to speak, but the roots are in Judaism, and it is the roots that are the source of the tree and the branches. You will say branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true, right? So you could be proud and say God chose to divorce the Jews, to break off the Jews in order to enable me to be grafted in. He must have thought I was more important than them. But then St. Paul goes on to say, but even the others, if they do not persist in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again. For if you have been cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these natural branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? So I will take the call. I see we have another caller. We have another two callers, maybe. I don't know. I will take the calls in about 2 minutes or 1 minute if their callers are willing to hold on. I want to finish the thought of the paragraph that I just ended. For if you have been cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these natural branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? So what St. Paul is saying, and I'm not making this up, is there is a gift to the Jewish election. There's a gift to the Jewish people that makes them even better suited to the tree. I'm not making this up. He's saying that. If you have been cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree, that's the Gentiles in the church, the non-Jews in the church, and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, that is, the church is the outgrowth of Judaism, how much more will these natural branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? So there is something special there in the election of the Jews, racially, ethnically, however you want to look at it, as the offspring of Abraham through Isaac, that will make them even better grafted into the olive tree, better suited to be grafted into the olive tree. Now I will take a call or two. So if the studio would put on a call, and if the caller would say their name and where they're calling from, and we'll take it from there.
Hello?
Hello? Yes, you're on the air.
Hi. Thank you. Mr. Showman. And my name is Isabel. I'm calling from Hollywood, Florida. I am a Catholic. I am not a biblical scholar, so but a devout Catholic. And I'm calling just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. Forgive me, I might have missed part of your discourse. But so my first part of my question is, are you saying that the fact that the Jewish people denied Christ was part of divine will, as part of a greater plan to bring in other peoples, the Gentiles?
That is exactly what I spent the first part of the show talking about.
Okay, I thought that's what I heard you say, so I'm happy. I just wanted to confirm that I'm hearing correctly. Mm-hmm. And so then my follow-up question, Mr. Shulman, or Dr. Shulman, forgive me, is whether the continued disaffection of the Jewish people from Jesus Christ as Savior is also part of the divine plan.
I think that, you know,
I think that our job,
it's a good question. Our job is evangelization. Go out and make disciples of all nations, beginning in Jerusalem. Our call is very clear, is to spread the gospel and to bring as many people into the gift of the church as possible. And certainly the Jews, the whole world owes Jesus, well, got to be careful, but in any case, the Jews prayed for 2,000 years in order to bring about the incarnation, to bring about Jesus. The Jews came up with the Blessed Virgin Mary and so forth. So the world owes a huge debt to the Jews for making the incarnation possible and for being the first phase of salvation history. They certainly deserve to benefit from that, from the second phase of salvation history. So I think our job is clear, which is to evangelize everyone, including and possibly even especially the Jews. Now, whether they receive the light of faith or not, that is up to God. And so I think we have to respect the fact that God may be doing something pretty mysterious with the Jews, which may mean that some of them will be very stiff-necked and hard-hearted and deaf and not respond to the call of Christ. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to make that call. Does that answer your question?
Well, thank you. I think it was a complex question on a late Saturday day.
Okay.
But I do thank you, and I appreciate it. That was interesting to hear from you that the rejection of not all, of course, but many Jewish people in power of Jesus as Christ was actually part of the divine plan to bring Gentiles and others in. So
yeah,
that was the first time I'd ever heard that. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your interest. And it's there in your Bible also, Romans 11. It's waiting for you to look at and pray about and think about. I think we may have another caller, in which case I will take her. I'll be a little bit brief perhaps, but we have time to take her or him, if you would put him or her on. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, you're on.
Oh, hello. Yes. Oh, this is my second time calling, but they said it was okay for me to call twice. But actually the previous caller kind of shed light on sort of what I was going to say. But I was thinking of when Jesus was entering Jerusalem, and when he sat down and cried for the Jewish people, and he said, Jerusalem, I guess you know the words better than me, but something about that you will wither like this tree. And Jesus actually wept that the Jewish people were not going to accept him as a whole. But and then I remember you're saying that the existence of people outside the church is awful. It's cold and it's full of inside. I mean, they're all materialistic, and they're chained to this world. They have no hope. It's just awful. And I can't. But the previous caller who talked about is a continuing rejection of Christ, part of the plan, and that's maybe the key.
Okay, let me cut you off because I only have about 2 minutes and I want to answer your question. I don't want to just leave it with the question because it's a great question. Okay, I'm just gonna read the last couple of verses. But before I read the verses, let me cite paragraph 674 of the Catholic Catechism. This is totally kosher. Paragraph 674 says the glorious Messiah's coming is suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel. It's dogma that the second coming has to be preceded by a widespread conversion of the Jews. That's the plan. The plan is, I'll just read it here from St. Paul. Lest you be wise in your own conceits, I want you to understand this mystery, brethren. A hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full number of the Gentiles come in, and so all Israel will be saved. Okay? A hardening has come upon part of Israel until all of the Gentiles who are coming into the church come in. And then that veil will be removed from the eyes of the Jews, and they too will enter the church. Okay, I'll just repeat those verses. I want you to understand this mystery. A hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full number of the Gentiles come in, and so all Israel will be saved. And that is the scripture verse that is cited in the Catechism as support for the statement that the glorious Messiah's coming is suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel. And I'll just read one or two more verses. As regards the gospel, they are enemies of God for your sake. We talked about that. As regards the gospel, they are enemies of God for the sake of the Gentiles. But as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers, for the gifts and the call of God are irrevocable. So I started the show talking about if you have to separate the salvific value of Judaism from the election of the Jews, but St. Paul makes perfectly clear, as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers, for the gifts and the call of God are irrevocable. And with that, I really have come to the end of my time with you today. So I want to thank you. You've been listening to Jesus, the Promised Messiah of Judaism on Radio Maria with me, your host, Roy Schoeman. I hope you join us again next week, same time, same place. And I will go out playing a hymn by the same small religious group, Harpe Dei. It's a hymn to Christ the King, glory and praise and honor to Christ the King, because that's what it's all about. So here we go. And thank you, and I hope you come again next week.
Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui pueri ledecus, prompsito sana pium. Israel est tu Rex, Davidis et inclita proles, nomine qui Domini, Rex benedicte venis, cetus in excelsis, te laudat celicus omnis, et mortalis homo, et cuncta creata simul. Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor, cui pueri ledecus, prompsito sana pium. Plebs Hebrea tibi, cum palmis obvia venit, cum precevoto hymnis, ad sumus exetibi, itibi pasuro, solvebant munia lauris, nos tibi regnanti, tangimus exemelos. Gloria laus et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe